But the movies that were sent in to us were different. In the first place, it takes an expert with elaborate equipment to fake a movie. We had or knew about 4 strips of movie film that fell into the unknown category. 2 were the cinetheodolite movies that had been taken at White Sands Proving Ground in April and May of 1950. 1 was the Montana movie, and the last was the Tremonton movie. These latter 2 had been subjected to thousands of hours of analysis, and since we planned to give the panel of scientists more thorough reports on them on Friday, I skipped over their details and went to the next point I wanted to cover: theories. Periodically throughout the history of the UFO, people have come up with widely publicized theories to explain all UFO reports. The one that received the most publicity was the one offered by Dr. Donald Menzel of Harvard University. Dr. Menzel, writing in Time, Look, and later in his Flying Saucers, claimed that all types of light phenomena. We studied this theory thoroughly because it did seem to have merit. Project Bear's physicists studied it. ATI's scientific consultant studied it and discussed it with several leading European physicists whose specialty was atmospheric physics. In general, the comments that Project Blue Book received were, "He's given the subject some thought, but his explanations are not the panacea." And there were other widely publicized theories. One man said that they were all skyhook balloons, but we knew the flight path of every skyhook balloon, and they were seldom reported as UFOs. Their little brothers, the weather balloons, caused us a great deal more trouble. The Army engineers took a crack at solving the UFO problem by making an announcement that a scientist in one of their laboratories had duplicated a flying saucer in his laboratory. Major Dewey Fournet checked into this one. It had all started out as a joke, but it was picked up as fact, and the scientist was stuck with it. He gained some publicity, but lost prestige, because other scientists wondered just how competent the man really was to try to pass off such an answer. All in all, the unsolicited assistance of theorists didn't help us a bit, I told the panel members. Some of them were evidently familiar with the theories because they nodded their heads in agreement. The next topic I covered in my briefing was a question that came up quite frequently in discussions of the UFO. Did UFO reports actually start in 1947? We had spent a great deal of time trying to resolve this question. Old newspaper files, journals, and books that we found in the Library of Congress contained many reports of odd things being seen in the sky as far back as the biblical times. The old Negro spiritual says, "Ezekiel saw a wheel way up in the middle of the air." We couldn't substantiate Ezekiel's sighting because many of the very old reports of odd things observed in the sky could be explained as natural phenomena that weren't fully understood in those days. The first documented reports of sightings similar to the UFO sightings as we know them today appeared in the newspapers of 1896. In fact, the series of sightings that occurred in that year and the next had many points of similarity with the reports of today. The sightings started in the San Francisco Bay Area on the evening of November 22, 1896, when hundreds of people going home from work saw a large, dark, cigar-shaped object with stubby wings traveling northwest across Oakland. Within hours after the mystery craft had disappeared over what is now the northern end of the Golden Gate Bridge, the stories of people in other Northern California towns began to come in on the telegraph wires. The citizens of Santa Rosa, Sacramento, Chico, and Red Bluff Several thousand of them saw it. I tried to find out if the people in these outlying communities saw the UFO before they heard the news from the San Francisco area or afterward, but trying to run down the details of a 56-year-old UFO report is almost hopeless. Once, while I was on a trip to Hamilton Air Force Base, I called the offices of the San Francisco Chronicle, and they put me in touch with a retired employee who had worked on a San Francisco paper in 1896. I called the old gentleman on the phone and talked to him for a long time. He had been a copy boy at the time and remembered the incident, but time had canceled out the details. He did tell me that he, the editor of the paper, and the news staff had seen the ship, as he referred to the UFO. His story, even though it was 56 years old, smacked of others I'd heard when he said that no one at the newspaper ever told anyone what they had seen. They didn't want people to think that they were crazy. On November 30th, the mystery ship was back over the San Francisco area, and those people who had maintained that people were being fooled by a wag in a balloon became believers when the object was seen moving into the wind. For 4 months, reports came in from villages, cities, and farms in the West, then the Midwest as the airship moved eastward. In early April of 1897, people in Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois reported seeing it. On April 10th, it was reported to be over Chicago. Reports continued to come into the newspapers until about April 20th. Then it, or stories about it, were gone. Literally thousands of people had seen it before the last report clicked in over the telegraph wires. A study of the hundreds of newspaper accounts of this sighting that rocked the world in the late 1890s was interesting because the same controversies that arose then exist now. Those who hadn't seen this stubby-winged, cigar-shaped craft said phooey, or the 19th century version thereof. Those who had seen it were almost ready to do battle to uphold their integrity. Some astronomers loudly yelled Venus, Jupiter, and Alpha Orionis, while others said, "We saw it." Thomas Edison, the man of science of the day, disclaimed any knowledge of the mystery craft. "I prefer to devote my time to objects of commercial value," he told a New York Herald reporter. "At best, Thomas, you goofed on that prediction." I had one more important point to cover before I finished my briefing and opened the meeting to a general question and answer session. During the past year and a half, we had had several astronomers visit Project Blue Book, and they were not at all hesitant to give us their opinions, but they didn't care to say much about what their colleagues were thinking, although they did indicate that they were thinking. We decided that the opinions and comments of astronomers would be of value, so late in 1952 we took a poll. We asked an astronomer who we knew to be unbiased about the UFO problem and who knew every outstanding astronomer in the United States to take a trip and talk to his friends. We asked him not to make a point of asking about the UFO, but just to work the subject into a friendly conversation. This way, we hoped to get a completely frank opinion. To protect his fellow astronomers, our astronomer gave them all code names, and he kept the key to the code. The report we received expressed the detailed opinions of 45 recognized authorities. Their opinions varied from that of Dr. C, who regarded the UFO project as a silly waste of money to investigate an even sillier subject, to Dr. L, who has spent a great deal of his own valuable time personally investigating UFO reports because he believes that they are something real. Of the 45 astronomers who were interviewed, 36% were not at all interested in the UFO reports, 41% were interested to the point of offering their services if they were ever needed, and 23% thought that the UFOs were a much more serious problem than most people recognized. None of the astronomers, even during a friendly discussion, admitted that he thought the UFOs could be interplanetary vehicles. All of those who were interested would only go so far as to say, "We don't know what they are, but they're something real." During the past few years, I have heard it said that if the UFOs were really solid objects, our astronomers would have seen them. Our study shed some light on this point. Astronomers have seen UFOs. None of them has ever seen or photographed anything resembling a UFO through his telescope, but 11% of the 45 men had seen something that they couldn't explain. Although, technically speaking, these sightings were no better than hundreds of others in our files as far as details were concerned, they were good because of the caliber of the observer. Astronomers know what is in the sky. It is interesting to note that out of the representative cross-section of astronomers, 5 of them, or 11%, had sighted UFOs. For a given group of people, this is well above average. To check this point, the astronomer who was making our study picked 90 people at random, people he met while traveling, and got them into a conversation about flying saucers. These people were his control group, to borrow a term from the psychologists. Although the percentage of people who were interested in UFOs was higher for the control group than for the group of astronomers, only 41% of the astronomers were interested, while 86% of the control group were interested. 11% of the astronomers had seen UFOs, while only about 1% of the control group had seen one. This seemed to indicate that as a group, astronomers see many more UFOs than the average citizen. When I finished my briefing, it was too late to start the question and answer session, so the first day's meeting adjourned. But promptly at 9 o'clock the next morning, the group was again gathered, and from the looks of the list of questions some of them had, they must have been thinking about UFOs all night. One of the first questions was about the results of photography taken by the pairs of huge meteorite patrol cameras that are located in several places throughout North America. Did they ever photograph a UFO? The cameras, which are in operation almost every clear night, can photograph very dim lights, and once a light is photographed, its speed and altitude can be very accurately established. If there were any objects giving off light as they flew through our atmosphere, there is a chance that these cameras might have photographed them. But they hadn't. At first, this seemed to be an important piece of evidence, and we had just about racked this fact up as a definite score against the UFO when we did a little checking. If the UFO had been flying at an altitude of 100 miles,